Hey, third grade. Today you are going to continue working on your Grant Wood landscape. We're going to finish this up next week in class. So today you're going to take your 30 minutes of art class and you're going to work a little further on it. I want to show you exactly what you can do and how to do it. Okay. Then you can go ahead and flip off the video and get to work. What you're going to need today is you're going to need your crayons. Okay. You're going to need some watercolor paint. Now I know not everybody has watercolor paint. So if you don't have watercolor paint, here's what I want you to find instead. Instead, I want you to just get regular markers, okay? Regular markers, and I want you to find some Q-tips, okay? Usually people have them hanging out in the bathrooms at their house, okay? So find some cotton swab Q-tips, and everybody that has watercolor paint and has markers will also need a cup of water, okay? Remember, don't fill your water to the top, only fill it about halfway. That way you don't make a mess, okay? So that's the supplies you're gonna need. So if you need to pause the video, go get what you need. Okay, great, you're back. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look at what we're gonna do here. I'm gonna switch to my overhead camera. All right, so step one today is you need to, and I talked about this last week, but not everybody started on this. You need to go over all of your details with a crayon, okay? If you want to add details inside of your details, like a little bit of texture in your tree, things like that, you could certainly do that, okay? That's the time to do that. Maybe here on my roof, I want to do some like little roof shingles, little texture there, okay? Though this is the time to put little things like that on your picture. So this might take you, 5-10 minutes, depending, um, you know, how many details you need to add and what you're going to outline. I'm adding just some grass details here on my first hill. Remember, this first hill is probably where you want to put some of those close-up details, flowers, little animals, things like that, because remember, this first hill, this is the one that we're kind of walking into. So we should be able to see close-up details on this hill right here, right? So maybe I would see little blades of grass and things like that. So I'm going to just go ahead and pop some of those things in with crayon. I'm not too worried about grass details on these hills because, like we said, they're a lot further away, right? So I really won't see things that are like grass on the hills that are further away. So I feel like I'm pretty good. And so I already did this part. So if you didn't do that, go ahead and get that done right now. So pause the video, go ahead and outline everything with crayon right now. Now, we're going to go ahead and paint this. Now, here's the deal. Also, by the way, I mentioned you need watercolor paint or markers and water and or Q-tips, okay? If you have none of that stuff, then you're just going to work with crayon and you're just going to color it in with what you have because like I always say, we use what we have, right? So whatever it is you have, that's what you're going to use, okay? So use what you have. Artists always use what they have. All right. The other thing I want to do is I want to warn you. Some of you are using very thin paper, okay? So like maybe you're using like thin computer paper like that. When you get that wet, you got to be really careful because as soon as you get paper wet, it can weaken the paper and you can very easily tear through your paper without even meaning to. Just going over it with your paintbrush can tear your paper, especially at the edges. So I have thicker paper, okay? So this is going to be good for painting. If your paper is thinner, you want to try to use less water, okay? You're still going to use water. You're just going to be very careful with it, okay? The other thing you can do is keep a towel nearby in case you have any accents. But the other thing you can do, put some extra scrap pieces of paper underneath. These scrap pieces of paper will help the water kind of soak through the paper a little bit. It will protect your paper just a little bit. It's not going to be perfect, but it can work, okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and put green. I'm going to paint my hills green here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, think about a landscape. When you look off into the distance, you don't see the details. And what happens is the colors end up being a lot lighter, way off in the distance. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in right here. And I want this part of my landscape, I want it to end up being a bit darker, okay? So I'm going to really kind of go over this and add more paint, okay? And really add more paint. Notice I'm not dipping back in the water yet. I'm just adding more paint. Now I started to run out of water, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So my up close, it's gonna be a little bit darker green. In fact, with this green here, I could even see myself like trying to do just a, let's mix a little bit of this brown in here too. See how just a drip of brown kind of darkens that up a little bit? It's kind of up to you. And now you can see my paper. I don't know if you can tell this or not, but my paper is beginning to curl a little bit. And the reason why it's curling is because it's wet. So even my thicker paper, it changes once it gets wet. And that's okay. You're gonna have that happen, but just be careful with that. Now, off in the distance, I want this part of my landscape to be a lot lighter than this part, okay? So I'm gonna use the same color, but this time what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drip more water in there, and I'm gonna use a really watery green. In fact, that's a little bit too light, so I'm gonna dip my brush in water again, and see how when I dip my brush into the water again, so I'm not using more water necessarily, I'm just using less paint. And so see how much lighter that green is by adding more water like that? So each one of these hills, I want to get a little bit darker as it comes forward. And that's too dark. And if it's too light, just add a little more paint. And then as you're doing this, of course, you can let it dry too. And after it's dry, you can always add a little more paint to it. Now, some of you don't have paint and you have markers, okay? So what are you going to do, all right? Well, I'll go into this middle hill here, okay? So another way to kind of fake paint, we're gonna pretend to paint here. I'm gonna just take my marker and color in like this. Maybe I should have done the tree with this color. Oh well. I'm gonna grab my Q-tip, okay? Oh, this is a used Q-tip. I'm gonna grab a clean Q-tip, dip it in my water. And look at how, when you spread this around, it turns the marker and it looks like paint. Pretty slick, huh? And then you can even take that and look at it, it'll even paint further till it kind of runs out, okay? So I'm gonna just go ahead and add a little bit more marker here, and that'll finish up that hill over here. Okay, so that's what you need to do, okay? You are going to go ahead and do all the paint. Let me rewind. You're gonna do a decent amount of painting. I guess this video is gonna be about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes long when it's done. So take another 15, 20 minutes to work on your painting. I don't expect you to finish it today. I would like you to finish it probably in class next week so I can kind of see where your progress is and maybe give you some pointers and some tips, okay? So maybe work on it a little bit today, bring it to class next week, and be ready to kind of turn it in at the end of class next week. That's what we're shooting for, okay? I'm excited to see your work. You guys have a great week, and I will see you live next week. Peace.